Presented today is data demonstrating that in mouse models of autism that the microbiome seems to have an effect on behavior and that we can correct behaviors associated with autism with specific probiotics. Yeah, microbiome research has changed in the last couple of years, and going back maybe 8 or 9 years, the microbiome initially made connections to immunity and to metabolism, but in the last couple of years people have appreciated the gut-brain connection and how the microbiome may affect neurological disorders or behaviors associated with mood and cognition and even neurodegeneration. And I think the field is in general headed towards trying to identify both mechanisms and potential therapies. I think the agenda and the program for Global Engage is very timely, and it's wonderful to bring academics and industry together under one roof to talk about what are the emerging themes and potential collaborations between scientists and business people.
I just moderated a panel on the business of the microbiome. I had a panelist on there from nutrition, and a couple of panelists from pharma, and one from a small biotech company. And it was interesting to exchange sort of opinions and perspectives around where the business of the microbiome is going. Well, the microbiome is sort of a hot space today. It's getting hotter, but along with it comes a lot of hype, and there's perhaps an overhyping of the microbiome. But I think that in the middle of all that, there's some really exciting science that keeps building and keeps growing. We already have a treatment for recurrent C. diff that is much more efficacious than anything else prior. We know that there's lots of papers every day where the quality of the papers are moving from merely a correlation between a particular disease state to a microbiome profile to actually a causative critical role that the microbiome is playing in that disease state. And as more of those kinds of, that kind of work gets funded, get exposed to and actually happens, I think this field is going to grow, and it's going to be, for us, you know, I'm at Second Genome, and for us, clearly the most important thing is trying to nail it down to mechanisms of action of how the microbiome can be used for disease. And the closer we are to that, we think that this will be the fact that separates from the hype. We're more focused on drugs that are either bioactives or small molecule, large molecule inhibitors of certain key reactions or interactions that can be beneficial for health and wellness. So we have a drug discovery platform aimed at elucidating that through microbiome sort of profiles and informatics, and then we check them out in vitro and in vivo validations, and then that's how we created a portfolio of new drugs. So we're in a preclinical stage in inflammatory bowel disease and metabolic diseases. I'm pleased with this meeting, though. It's a place where we can exchange information. There's certainly people here that for whom microbiome is an important piece of their company or their research that's going forward. So I'm sort of interested and excited to meet people that are you know, of a caliber in this field, and it's a chance for us to sort of exchange ideas and move forward. So it's a good meeting.
What I presented today was on the microbiome program at Mayo Clinic in Rochester in the context of the Center for Individualized Medicine. Our program has 3 basic areas, the discovery area, the translational, and the clinical trial and practice area. We learn from each of them, and in some regards we're doing mechanistic work that utilizes metabolic modeling. And we also do germ-free facility type work that allows us to understand mechanisms and look at the individual responses in a humanized mouse model. So the microbiome research has a long ways to go. It started off quite well with the fecal transplant being so successful. We should be encouraged by that. We should also be encouraged by the fact that we can start to unravel a lot of mysteries that were really left unsolved for so many years. It's encouraging to see that we understand the gut-brain axis better through the neurotransmitters, the metabolites in the gut. So the implications will reach far beyond simple things like C. diff, which is a bacterial infection almost. It's an overpopulation of the wrong bacteria and speaks to a microbial community problem in the gut. But once you start looking at the metabolites and their influence systemically, now we start looking at diseases like were presented autism, immune dysfunctions and inflammatory conditions, not just inside the gut but outside the gut. My own area of interest is in colon cancer, and I do think that the microbiome is probably the single most important component of the environment that will influence what really causes the first mutation to occur. And that's going to be potentially true in other areas. We're looking at endometrial cancer, breast cancer, for example, and like the viral related diseases and cancers, those related to human papillomavirus, the hepatitis virus. I'm sure there will be relationships between the microbiome and cancer that we'll discover. So the long-term implications, I think, are pretty significant. The short-term, I think, will play out more in the health arena. Why do we have an epidemic in obesity, diabetes, and autism? If we can understand whether there's a major role by the microbiome, we may be able to restore health by understanding diet better and early indicators that there's a predisposition for an individual to have develop one of those conditions that are really of epidemic proportions now. I think the agenda is excellent. I think it's a good broad representation of academic centers and investigators with industry, and without that early dialogue, you won't have acceleration of the process of discovery, translation, and application. We can't get to patients in a broadest possible way without the help of industry, because they know how to make it happen. So I think it's a very important partnership. The more we can make that partnership early, the sooner I think we can get to helping people who need the help of the microbiome research. So I'm very encouraged. I think the topics are appropriate, and it covers the range that we need to. And I think the manner of the meeting, the way it's been set up, is excellent for that.
My presentation is about our research on the human skin microbiome and its association with acne, which is the most common skin disease in humans. I think definitely the microbiome field is rapidly evolving, and our research is mostly on the skin microbiome at strain level, which is different from many studies which are mostly at the species level or above. So from what our study, we found that actually the strain level differences in the microbiome is quite important, and important in terms of disease association and potential therapeutics. So I think one of the directions of human microbiome study is really to look at the microbiome at deeper level, like strain level. My understanding of this year's meeting definitely has coverage on more other microbiome, for example, the skin microbiome or the vaginal microbiome or the oral microbiome. So that's slightly different from the meeting last year, I think. So that's very important, and I'm very happy because my lab study the human skin microbiome and oral microbiome, and these areas are definitely under research compared to the gut microbiome. So I really hope people can pay more attention on those microbiome as well. I see a lot of familiar people, familiar faces from the microbiome field, but definitely also people from the business side, and which I think is important because the field is developing to a stage that we need to translate our findings to applications. So I really hope the meeting really combine or synergize the interactions between business and research so that we can really make our discoveries in the lab into the bedside.
I actually work in a partnering function at a large pharmaceutical company, and so for me it's more important not just to get the academic perspective or go to a basic science type of conference, but to actually go to a smaller partnering meeting where there is definitely science, but there's the opportunity to network and meet people who are in the business in different functions and in different sectors of in doing microbiome research. I actually think it's pretty reflective and interestingly enough, a lot of familiar faces, so people I do actually interact with anyway, but I would say it's a pretty good cross-section of the people who are doing like the big data type of large analysis of microbiome in academia, people who are doing more smaller target type research in academia, but also the small startups, medium-sized companies who are really focused on microbiome, as well as the large pharma who are obviously looking for therapeutics, and looking at manipulating the microbiome in order to develop therapeutics. So I think a really good cross-section, and I'm happily what I expected. I really enjoyed the panel discussion. I thought that was a very candid discussion from, well, it was very much more industry focused, but it was a pretty candid discussion from people who are in the large pharma space versus the smaller, startup biotech type space. And a really, I think, good discussion about, what the hurdles are. And, with all the hype that we see in the press about microbiome, what the real issues are in microbiome and how, perhaps scientifically, we're really at the very nascent stages of microbiome research. I think in the near term, probably a lot of people are going to be looking at therapeutics where you're trying to replace specific bacteria. Fecal transplant obviously already has made it into the clinic. But people are going to probably look initially at replacement of specified types of bacteria based on studying the microbiome of sick versus healthy. But I think as we move further beyond that, it'll become more sophisticated into understanding what pathways are disrupted at the interaction between microbiome and the human system and human biology. We were already looking at immunology. And then beyond that, how can we, I don't want to say engineer, but how can we manipulate the microbiome or certain not pathogens, but certain bacterial species in order to deliver something that might be beneficial. What people will get out of it from this particular meeting or forum compared to, say, going to a Keystone meeting or something like that, is you are getting a much more diverse opinion, perspective on microbiome research, and you're really getting more of an application focus. I think a lot of, and there's nothing wrong with academic conferences, absolutely not, but it's a different focus. And I think for somebody who's interested in actually application of microbiome and that research for therapeutics, for biomarkers, for patient stratification, for any of those things, this is probably a more important meeting to come to. And I think the other thing also is for networking. If you're in the business of trying to develop a microbiome therapeutic, this is probably a great place to meet. It's a small enough meeting, it's a great place to meet the right people that you want to work with.
We had to start this company with biomarkers, with diagnostics, mostly because the science was new, counting genes and compare the gene numbers with the bacterial gene numbers coming from the gut microbiome and disease phenotype was something not so obvious in the early days. And as you cannot build a house by starting with the roof, we decided to first understand the relationship between the abnormalities of the gut microbiome composition and the development of the disease. And it took us 2 years to fulfill this in IBD and in metabolic disorders. After that, we decided that it was about time to go to the next step, that was looking for drugs according to the mode of action that we have identified for some of the bacteria to be nasty with the gut in the development of certain diseases like Crohn's disease. And in fact, we found a drug recently that was perfectly fitting with our needs, meaning getting rid of some bacteria without killing the whole subset of gut bacteria. Just like an antibiotic can do. Okay, so we gave a kind of new name to this new class of drugs, which is contrabiotics instead of antibiotics. So we are not killing bugs; we are just killing specifically one bug according to its mode of action and some specificity that the bug has compared to the others. So, in that sense, Antherome is different because we are not seen anymore as a pure diagnostic company, but a company which is mixing drugs and diagnostics, which is perfectly fitting with the new concept of personalized medicine. I see mostly three types of developments. One is drugs, so definitely there will be more and more drugs that will be dedicated to specifically address some bad functioning between the gut bacteria and the immune system. I see as well in the drug space some development of probiotics, people being able to understand amongst the bacterial population which are the ones at stake and that they could take as they are, cultivate and put into pills and administer these probiotics to patients. It will be more tricky because it's always difficult to develop living material up to the market. And the third type of development will be diagnostics. Definitely diagnostic because there are so many diseases at stake in the development of the disorganized microbiome that definitely the pharmaceutical industry will need biomarkers to stratify patients in clinical trials, and the physicians are in great needs, as well as the patients, in having tools, non-invasive, to better understand what's the stages of the disease and what's the activity of the drug that could be seen by a diagnostic.
I got involved in microbiome research about 5 years ago at the beginning, and at that time most of the research was involved with figuring out how to do it, how to collect the data, how to collect the samples that are sequenced, how to do the sequencing, all the technical part. Once that was under control a little bit, people started getting into discovery. How can we take all of this information and find out what's there and perhaps give us some hints about how it could translate into medical outcomes and research and treatments? We're now getting to the point where we have those discovery phase tools well developed, and we're now starting to get into the translational aspect where we're looking at how does this relate to disease? Is the microbiome in sick people different than healthy people? In particular, our interest is how do we test that formally so that we know we're getting good objective decision making. I think it really brought in the right mix of people who are saying this is what our discoveries were, this is what we found over the last couple years. There was little discussion on the technology because that's been solved, and people are now taking the discovery results from the last couple years and starting to move into the next phase of the translational, the product development, the commercialization of this. So we're really right on the cusp between those 2 points, and I think your conference brought in the right mix. Probably the nicest thing I've found about this is that we have a range of people from the top institutes to the new startups, and that just shows kind of the whole range of all the problems that need to be solved. So that made it very, very appealing to me. As a service company, we're looking to learn what that range is of needs, and you definitely brought in people who covered it all.
Taconic Biosciences is focused on animal models, and a lot of the work that's going on in this area is done in animal models. A lot of work's being done in humans as well too. And while there's some cause and effect questions going on, the way to get those answers is going to be through animal models. So we've had the opportunity to interact with people who are using animal models. We've had the opportunity to interact with people who are doing work in humans and want to move back into animal models to answer certain questions. So it's been a fantastic mix of people to interact with. What's really worked is the opportunity to meet with people in between the talks, to approach the speakers, to get a little bit more information from them, and then go into the networking sessions, and either people are seeking us out or we're looking to talk to other people, and you're able to get into some really in-depth conversations about what they're doing and where their needs are for new products and services. So that's been a great opportunity for us. I came to this conference a year ago and there was approximately 50 people here. There's 200 people here this year, so there's certainly a lot more interest in it, which I think is going to result in the amount of information being produced each year. Publications is just going to go up even faster than it has been, so that maybe in 2 to 3 years from now, then we might start to have an idea about where this industry is going to go. I think there's still a lot of promise in it. We've seen some interesting therapies already tried and been successful. I think we'll continue to see some of those. So I think there's a lot of hope here, and I'm hopeful that that will continue. The mix of people that are attracted to this conference is great. There are people from large pharmaceutical companies, small biotech companies, startups, universities, service companies. That's a fantastic mix, because in order to be successful in any field of science, you really need a mix of disciplines, mix of academic, basic studies, and then applied studies. You need service companies to help provide some of the tools that are needed. So this is the one meeting that seems to attract all of those groups. So that's been a really high point for us. We've been treated very well. The sponsorship is a good opportunity for us to have our name shown in different places. Having an exhibit in the networking area is great, so that we can intermingle with people, or they can come approach us. So I think the sponsorship opportunity has been really positive for Taconic Biosciences.
Well, Ondek is focused on looking at how Helicobacter pylori can be of use in terms of modulating the immune system. And this is a bacteria, it's the only bacteria we know of that actually resides in the stomach and has lived as a guest of the human body for millennia. What we know then is it's adapted very well to that environment, and it has a very intrinsic relationship with the immune system. So the immune system of humans tolerates its presence very well. In this way, we think it sets the immune tolerance for humans and enables, therefore, humans to be quite receptive to harmless antigens. What we've found over time is with the removal of this bacteria from our populations, particularly in Western civilizations, with the introduction of antibiotics and much cleaner type environments, is that people are becoming much more susceptible to allergy. It's been a great opportunity to learn what people are doing, and I think to have a two-day meeting where we're looking at what's going on in academia, as well as what companies are looking for, some of the large pharma here, what they're looking for, some of the service providers, and what types of technologies are being developed and refined, I guess, for some of the work that we need to do with the microbiome, together with some of the VC groups, has been very, very helpful for me to get an understanding of where the space is going, when we might expect the first products and what they might look like. I'd be very interested to see more about the type of products that people think they can start to develop. There's a lot of underlying research, but in my mind, and I've been part of a few revolutions, whether it be genomics or proteomics, and I think it's very, very important that products get out there as soon as possible. So I think the work that's being done with fecal transplants, particularly choosing C. difficile, this very organism that infects a large number of people and is fatal in many cases, is a tremendously good idea to be approaching that, and I'd like to see more of that happen. So I suppose I would encourage people to come to this meeting who have ideas about where those early stage products could come from. I think if we wait for us to fully understand microbe-host interactions and all of the complexity of the microbiome, which we will eventually understand a lot more about, but if we wait for that, you'll be setting a stage and building a platform that doesn't have anything on it. And I think that's really, really important to get products out there early, because that stimulates financial interest in this type of technology.
In 2010 that we would found a human microbiome therapeutics company, not in the GI realm like most other folks. We decided to stick to non-GI, and our first therapeutic is going to be in the skin, and it'll be out in 2015. I wanted to hear a little bit other people's stories, other people's discovery stories, other people's therapeutics applications, really what brought them to the human microbiome. So that's really been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed it. It's been really fruitful. I've essentially made new colleagues. Since we're in Sarasota, Florida, we're a little bit isolated in the biotech realm. I did my allergy asthma fellowship out here. We've made new potential collaborative connections, and I think that's really one of the best potentials for companies who are spread out all over the country, is to come to a potentially international meeting like this.
I'll be presenting work on women's health and the vaginal microbiome and maternal health. In this case, I think a lot of the work here has been focused on the gut, but I think I've convinced some people here that outside of the gut, there's also some interesting things going on that hold a lot of promise. It's been great to have the academic researchers alongside of the business collaborators here together. I think that having those discussions happening sometimes before the studies happen can help direct things so that research efforts are able to go in a direction such that what comes out can get out to the clinics as soon as possible. I think there's been a great combination of people working in the field and both in developing the business aspect, the microbiome field, and in some ways a unique place. As an academic researcher, I think this experience has been really useful in terms of better understanding how discoveries made in basic science can be translated by different companies and what that process is. Also, the presence of the FDA to understand where that field is moving and how these things will roll out has been also very useful in terms of designing studies. The field is moving quite rapidly, and I think the technology is moving, the pace at which we can make basic understandings about what is the human microbiome, what are healthy states, and what are states of dysbiosis that we should be concerned about. So I think that this field is moving into an area where personalized microbiomics will be the future, both from a diagnostic testing and not only for disease, but also to survey health states. To know what's healthy for an individual, and also ways to modulate, whether those are probiotic therapies, antibiotics, other diet, to actually modulate that for health.
The workshop took place the day before the main conference. We got a good group of people together, and we were talking about developing therapies from the microbiome, which is what we do at 4D Pharma. So we had a really good discussion about the rationale for developing those therapies, the sort of approaches you can take, the actual regulatory framework and the challenges around producing a product. And it was a great occasion because there were a number of people in the room who had real opinions about those subjects. Well, having been involved with the conference for the last 3 conferences now, we can see a real progression in terms of both the science and the thoughts about actually producing products from the microbiome. And that's evidenced by the number of people increasing every time. I think this time we saw some real convergence in terms of opinions on some of the key scientific challenges and issues around the microbiome, and particularly developing live biotherapeutics. And it was great to have a representative from the FDA here as well to clarify some of those points. Well, I think it's a really exciting point. There's a lot of science that's been produced. The number of publications are continue to ramp up. I think now's the time when we're going to see the first products progressing into the clinic. We're going to start to see results from those products, and that's going to be the real key test. And we ourselves have got products heading towards the clinic, and I think a lot of people are waiting to see what the results of those first trials are. So at 4D Pharma, as people know, we have projects that are heading towards the clinic, our first generation programs. We also have a pipeline of new bacteria that we're developing. We're looking at a wide variety of indications for those bacteria. And so we're really looking forward to the future of seeing those first clinical trials happen and also progress generating new data for new bacteria, new live biotherapeutics for a variety of different diseases.